This week's edition of Carving Up the Context revolves around Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin. Before we get into that, as primetime Deion Sanders says, give me my theme music. On this week's edition of Carving Up the Context, Mike Tomlin is the headline for this story. So Mike Tomlin led the Steelers to an unprecedented 17th straight season without a losing record. That is a personal record for Mike Tomlin, the most non-losing seasons, I should say the only head coach to go 17 or more seasons without having a losing year. So some 8-8 years, some Super Bowl championships, some playoff appearances, anything in between. Mike Tomlin has done just that. So he's been the standard of consistency and excellence in Pittsburgh. There is no question about that, what he's provided to the Steelers. However, there has been discussion around, the last 2 to 3 weeks about whether or not Mike Tomlin would step away from Pittsburgh. Whether it's the quarterback situation isn't exactly ideal. I mean, Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, Trubisky, it could be better. He's coached 17 years. He's still pretty young, mid-50s. I mean, he's still, in great shape. Coaching takes its toll on you. Maybe take a year off, kind of like Sean Payton did, go into television, Fox, CBS, NBC, ESPN, whoever would take him. Go into TV, take the year off, and then take a better job in 2025. Well, Mike Tomlin, according to Mike Garafolo, I should say, after this moment, after the Steelers lost to the Bills, when he was asked about his contract status.
Anyone?
Mike, you have a year left on your contract.
That was perfect. Mike Tomlin providing yet another meme. But listen, I don't blame him. He's like, you know what? I don't want to talk about this. I'm gonna think about it, whatever. And according to Mike Garafolo, who's the first to report this news, Mike Tomlin told the Pittsburgh Steelers the next day, yesterday really, that he would be back in 2024 as the Steelers head coach. And there's been a lot of debate about, okay, what do you do with Mike Tomlin? Because the Steelers have not won a playoff game since 2016, which I'll get into in just a moment. And yet and still, he hasn't had a losing record ever since he's been there, which is 2007. What do you do? Well, here's what I think you do. First of all, you leave it up to Mike Tomlin, of course. You give him the courtesy and the respect to make the decision whether or not he wants to stay or go, because it's hard to upgrade from Mike Tomlin. There's no question about that. He decides he wants to stay. Okay, because there's first our checklist. Mike Tomlin's staying. Now what do we do? Upgrade the offense. Go get a coordinator. Go get a quarterback. It's that simple. That's what wins in today's NFL. Now, Mike Tomlin, again, I want to continue to reiterate, he is one of the greatest coaches of all time. He is, in my view, with respect to Bill Cowher, the second greatest Steelers head coach of all time to, obviously, the late, great Chuck Noll, and a first-ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest coaches to ever do it. He's not an adapting type of guy. At least he hasn't shown himself to be thus far. The modern NFL, 2024, it's about quarterbacks, wide receivers, offensive play callers, offense. It's not about sacks and running the football. That's the way it was 20 years ago. That's the way it was when Mike Tomlin took over the Steelers in 2007. It played right into his strengths. He won a Super Bowl in 2008 and got to another Super Bowl, by the way, in 2010. It doesn't work that way anymore, and he hasn't adjusted. Now, Pittsburgh's last playoff win was 2016. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs, and by the way, a game in which they did not score a touchdown. They won the game by a multitude of field goals by Chris Boswell in Kansas City. This is before Mahomes got there. They're 0-5 in the playoffs since. Before we even get into the 0-5 thing in the playoffs. 27. So the last season with the playoff win was 2016. So from 2017 on, from 2017 on, Mike Tomlin has around an average record of around 10-7. The Steelers are 21st in points per game, 21st in yards per game, 25th in yards per play, 17th in pass yards per game, and 28th in rush yards per game. Simply put, they are inept on the offensive side of the football. In the playoffs, it's even worse. 0-5, they've been outscored 66-zip in the first quarter. In their 5 playoff losses combined. They've been outscored 122-47 in all of those 5 first halves combined. So not only has the offense been bad, the defense has been atrocious. How do I know this? They've allowed 202 points in their 5 playoff losses. That is the most in NFL playoff history in a 5-game stretch ever. You might be wondering, well, Pittsburgh hasn't won since 2016. I'm sure there's a lot of teams with playoff droughts. Well, yes, there are. About a quarter of the league has a playoff drought longer than Pittsburgh, a playoff win drought longer than Pittsburgh. But they're all kind of the teams we sort of laugh at, right? Carolina, Chicago, Raiders. Broncos haven't won a playoff game since Peyton was there. The Jets, Dolphins, Cardinals, Commanders. We kind of just laugh at most of these franchises. Either they can't get the quarterback right, can't get the coach right, ownership is bad, they've always been bad, or they, as in the organization's always been bad. We just kind of generally sort of roll our eyes at these franchises. They're the only ones with a longer playoff win drought than Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh put that list back up. Broncos, Panthers, Cardinals are the only ones, are the closest ones to Pittsburgh in terms of playoff win droughts. 2015, the Steelers have won a playoff game only 1 year more recently than the Broncos, the Cardinals, and the dysfunctional Panthers. That's where they're at. And it's because of an inability to adapt and adjust. I hear all the time, no disrespect, but from non-Steelers fans who say, oh my gosh, you can't fire a guy who's not had a losing record. Is that the goal, though? Is that the standard? Mike Tomlin has a saying all the time, the standard is the standard. Is that the standard in Pittsburgh? Hey, we don't suck. A franchise that has more Super Bowls than anybody except for the Patriots, that's where we've sunk to. I mean, that's stuff like the Browns would be thrilled about. If you told Cleveland, hey, you're going to have 17 straight years where we don't have a losing season, they would be having parades for a month in Cleveland. In Pittsburgh, it's, okay, it's good. I'm glad we're made the playoffs. It's nice. Play an extra game, I guess, but you never a shot to go on a run with Mason Rudolph at quarterback, or Kenny Pickett, or Mitch Trubisky, or an older Ben Roethlisberger before that. You say, well, what do you do? Well, what you should have done years ago, and that's draft a star quarterback. You say, well, Bryson, Big Ben was at the end of his career. Could have drafted a guy to back up Big Ben before he retired. 2018, the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted a kid out of, I believe, Virginia Tech by the name of Terrell Edmonds, who is no longer with the Pittsburgh Steelers. 4 picks after that, the Baltimore Ravens took a guy, maybe you've heard of him. His name's Lamar Jackson. He went 4 picks after Pittsburgh's pick in 2018. In 2020, in the second round, the Steelers had their first pick, which was in the second round. They took Chase Claypool, who A, is no longer a Steeler, and B, 4 picks later, the team in the same state, the Philadelphia Eagles, took this guy named Jalen Hurts. By the way, as a side note, Brock Purdy was Mr. Relevant. Everybody passing him. He's obviously panned out for San Francisco, but we can put that as a knock on everybody, so to speak. This is the most quarterback-loaded draft I can remember. Caleb Williams is going number 1. Drake May's probably going number 2. But then you have guys like Michael Penix Jr., who's an insane pocket passer and can make throws outside the pocket. Bo Nix, who's an athletic guy who's got a lot of college experience, brings a lot of stuff to the table. And Jaden Daniels, who's like a bigger version of Lamar. Great quarterback talent in the first round. Now, whether or not one of those guys will fall to Pittsburgh, who I believe has the 21st pick of the draft, we'll see. But would it kill you to maybe, I don't know, not draft a linebacker or a safety, a corner? Get a quarterback. And before you get a quarterback, go hire a creative offensive play caller. You think it didn't help CJ Stroud to have the OC he has from the Shanahan tree? You think Jordan Love, you think it goes a long way for Jordan Love to have Matt LaFleur calling plays and for Brock Purdy to have Kyle Shanahan calling plays? Think Bryce Young, limited as he looks, you think Bryce Young would look a little bit better with those guys under somebody from the Shanahan tree? From the Andy Reid tree? Eric Bieniemy is probably not coming back to Washington. Mike Tomlin, bring him Eric Bieniemy in. We know his history with Mahomes. We know his history as an offensive coordinator in the NFL. You bring him in, draft a guy, and guess who that quarterback gets? Creative offensive play designer. He gets George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and Pat Freiermuth to throw to. He gets to hand the ball off to Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, and he has a defense backed up by the best defensive player on planet Earth, TJ Watt, with a great defensive coach in Mike Tomlin. This is a crucial offseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers because, simply put, if we're in May, when the 2024 NFL draft concludes, early May, and the Pittsburgh Steelers have an uncreative OC and don't draft a quarterback, Tomlin needs to be out after 2024 because it will be evident at that point he will not adapt, he will not adjust, and it's more about preserving some kind of meaningless streak than it is about getting back to winning football in Pittsburgh. By the way, if that means you suck in 2024, then you suck in 2024. Sometimes you got to take one step back to take 2 steps forward. I think the Houston Texans would have liked to have had some non-losing seasons in 2020 and 21 and 22 and missed out on CJ Stroud. Or do you think they're glad, yeah, we sucked, we couldn't find the coach, then we found the coach, then we found the quarterback, and now we're set for the next decade? It's the name of the game in today's NFL. It is. Every single quarterback still remaining in the playoffs, outside of Brock Purdy, was drafted in the first round. Every single one, with the exception of Purdy. Draft a quarterback. Get an offensive play caller who's creative and not vanilla like Matt Canada. Only time will tell. I'm glad Tomlin's coming back. It's hard to upgrade from that guy, head coach. But adapt and adjust to what the NFL calls for today, not for what it called for when you first took the job. That's all I'm asking as a Steelers fan, because if the standard is just not sucking, all in the name of to keep a streak going and prevent potentially competing for another Super Bowl, maybe it's not that serious of a coach or a franchise anymore. Harsh, but true. That is this week's edition of Carving Up the Context. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube, and be sure to go click that big red subscribe button and check out the other clips and full shows from Carving It Up Live, as well as our other incredible content creators here on the Grid Network.